Next, my pleasure to introduce the Minister in Canada here, the Minister of Immigration and Refugees and Citizenship for the Government of Canada, the Honourable Ahmed Hussen.
Good evening. Good evening, brothers and sisters. It's a great night to be joining you here. It's quite an honor for me to be invited by Historica Canada with support from TD Bank to join you here to celebrate Black History Month. I'll very briefly state a number of things. First, when I was appointed minister, one of my first trips was to Nova Scotia, and I went to Halifax. And most specifically, I went to Preston. And thank you, yes. And as someone who grew up in Toronto, I was amazed by the different layers of Black history and Black immigration and African Canadian settlement and the challenges those people faced and the resiliency, the resilient nature that they had to overcome all the challenges. I was able to tour what the remnants of Africville, where the former church used to sit. I was given a chance to see the museum. It shows you the fact that Black history is older. Black settlements are older than Canada's confederation. And then a few months later, in the summer, I went to Saskatchewan. And even there, I was able to see, I was walking in a park and I was able to see a plaque commemorating the settlement of 1,000 Black people who had moved from Oklahoma to Saskatchewan in search of a better life and a better opportunity. And again, I was floored because that's not something that you learn in high school in Canada. It took me to go to law school to learn about Viola Desmond. I knew way more about Rosa Parks than Viola Desmond, and I think that's a shame. I think the stories of Black Canada have to be told and retold. And I want to specifically thank Historica Canada for playing its part in enabling the community to do so, but it's incumbent on each one of us to make sure that these stories that continue to be erased, that continue to be almost forgotten, are revived, celebrated, and disseminated across this country. Thank you. I want to secondly talk about the fact that it's been an honor to sit in Parliament with members of the Black Caucus. And you don't hear that. We actually have a Black Caucus in Ottawa. And we sit there, we talk about issues, we engage with the community, and we advocate. You hear people advocate politicians. We advocate within government to make sure that there's an African-Canadian lens to some of the issues that are brought up as part of the discussions across all levels of government in Canada. And in the process of doing that, we latched on to the importance of Canada to recognize and acknowledge and sign on to the UN Decade for People of African Descent. So that actually happened, last week, and I was proud to stand behind Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and together with members of the Black Caucus, where Canada officially agreed to sign on to the UN Decade for People of African Descent. And it's not just a simple commemoration. It compels Canada to do a number of things as part of that recognition. Issues around overrepresentation of African Canadians in prisons, economic development, and so on, and the education system. It shocked me to learn that between 2003 to 2013, there was an 80% jump in the number of Black inmates in federal prisons. So the fact of the matter is, the Prime Minister not only signed on to that document, he acknowledged for the first time for a sitting Prime Minister in Canada that systemic racism is a reality in Canada. He also talked about how he's going to commit his government to not only recognize that systemic racism is a fact, that we have to do better as a government, as a society, to deal with the manifestations of systemic racism. And he also talked about the importance of the government listening to the community, working with the Federation of Black Canadians and other leaders across the country to make sure that we continue the dialogue and the working partnership that has led the government to recognize the decade, but move forward to make real progress on issues such as the overrepresentation that I just spoke about, having the community's input in the government's larger strategy to review the criminal code, to try to deal with the issue of mandatory minimum sentences and so on. But I want to finish by saying that the stories that I referred to earlier, they're really, really important. And they're important because they validate individuals. When you see yourself reflected in a history book or in a university course, it makes you know that you belong. And that is something that can never be minimized. And secondly, I want to encourage all of the community members who are here and beyond that in addition to hard work and moving ahead in life, it's really, really important to push the ladder down and mentor a young person. It's really, really important to do that. It's important to acknowledge not only the historical stories that continue to inspire us, but the recent stories. You've heard of Masai's story and other newcomers who are continuing to add to the fabric of Canada, who are continuing to add to not only the diversity of Canada, but also the diversity within the Black community itself. I think that has to be acknowledged, and we have to acknowledge that that diversity within the Black community does not weaken us, it makes us stronger. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
All right, what a great message right there. Make sure you mentor a young person. It's so important that all of us who can do, of course.